Hello, and welcome to Read Aloud with Dan. Readings and discussions about progressive, socialist, and Marxist texts. This episode of Read Aloud is brought to you by the Marxist-Leninist Reading Hub at mlreadinghub.org. Support today at patreon.com/mlreadinghub. Today, we'll be discussing some entry-level background to Salvador Allende's victory speech, his speech to the UN, and his last words to the nation, as well as just some other background on his presidency and his reign in Chile for a couple years. I don't know why I said reign. That's terrible. And we'll also be reading from CovertAction magazine's article by Jeremy Kuzmarov, The Murder on Embassy Row, 46 Years on Remembering the Assassination of Orlando Letelier and Ronni Moffitt. I'd like to begin, however, with the Prol Wiki, or the Proletarian Encyclopedia's article, or entry, on Allende, which reads, he was a Chilean physician and socialist politician who served as the 28th president of Chile from November the 3rd of 1970 until his death on the 11th of September 1973. That's right, the other September 11th. He was the first Marxist to be elected in a liberal democracy in Latin America. That's what this says. In his early life, he became a doctor, helped found the Socialist Party of Chile in 1933. And then after his election in 1970, yes, almost 40 years later. So this guy was grinding. Allende emphasized that the right remained in control of the economy and the military, and how right he was. He proposed a 6-year plan for the nationalization of mines and factories. In December 1970, he proposed a constitutional amendment to nationalize the copper industry and offered compensation to the U.S. companies Anaconda and Kennecott, which controlled 80% of Chile's copper. You could already see the problem here. As president, he sought to nationalize major industries, expand education, and improve the living standards of the working class. He clashed with the right-wing parties that controlled Congress and with the judiciary. On the 11th of September 1973, the military moved to oust Allende in a coup d'etat supported by the United States CIA. As troops surrounded La Moneda Palace, he gave his last speech, vowing not to resign. We will read that speech at a later date. And it said there that he was a Marxist. And I do not believe he was a Marxist. And I'm not trying to say this as a diss. I'm just saying that, objectively, he rejected Marx and Lenin on a few fundamental issues. Despite that, he was a beloved democratic socialist who inspired millions, and he challenged U.S. hegemony in South America. He challenged imperialist capital, and he was rightly seen as a threat to empire, and thus, in the eyes of empire, with Nixon and Kissinger and CIA at the sticks, he had to go. It's going to be encouraged to you, the viewer, to seek out and watch the documentary on Salvador Allende by Patricio Guzman. You can see that here. It tells Salvador Allende's story from his youth in Valparaiso and his early career to his presidency of Chile and death during the coup of September 11th, 1973. It's sort of a tearjerker if you're someone who believes in some of the things that I believe in, and you'll see, I hope, the hope that swept Chile because of Allende, and how empire did what empire does, did what it could to snuff it out. That is something I cannot, unfortunately, impress upon you with these readings, I think, which is sort of further illustrating that reading simply isn't enough. We have to go farther than the books. We have to go farther than just this stream. I would like to share with you, however, a clip from that, which I did find on YouTube. Sorry. There's Allende with Castro. Allende shooting a rifle.
Salvador Allende ayudó concretamente a la lucha armada de América Latina. Sentía admiración por Fidel, el Che, Miguel Enríquez. Compartía el coraje y la audacia con ellos, sus amigos. Pero los lazos de lealtad y de respeto no enturbiaron nunca sus convicciones.
I'm just going to chime in here that after he was elected and ratified as president by the Congress, he invited Castro to visit Chile and speak, and it scandalized the right. Just imagine how big of a scandal that would be in a place, I don't know, like the U.S.
Salvador Allende, solo el camino democrático podía ir creando cada día el socialismo en Chile.
Now they're gonna interview the ambassador to Chile at the time, who sort of acts like he wasn't privy to everything that was going on, but he was smart enough to know what was going on. What an asshole!
What was your reaction when Allende was elected?
I thought this was Milton Friedman, but it's not. It's I can't remember his name.
When Allende was elected, I said that it was a grave and very serious defeat for the United States.
Why?
Why? Because he had said that the United States was the #1 enemy in the hemisphere. He had said this over and over again.
It's true.
Number two, he was the most
right.
Slavish admirer of Castro. He had spent 6 months in China admiring the work of the Mao Zedong government. He was very fond of Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam.
So what was wrong about? So he was right about everything. Like these fucking. I like how he's smiling at the whole thing, knowing what happened. He's still smiling.
He was a fan of Che Guevara. So we knew that although Allende would act in what appeared to be a legal and constitutional manner, it would be designed to eliminate all U.S. influences.
Good.
It would be designed as a class.
And that like makes them mad that it removes U.S. influence. Oh no, sovereignty. Look at them shudder at the idea of Chilean sovereignty.
Warfare to eliminate the middle class opposition, the bourgeois. It would be a class war approach.
It's always class war. You're doing class war.
It would eventually be fidelismo sin Fidel. Fidelismo without Fidel.
So Allende
Why is he
was
so
a threat
proud of
for
himself?
the U.S.
In judging the creation of a Santiago-Havana axis in Latin America at a time where all the social conditions necessary for revolutions involving a great deal of unrest and violence.
Oh, that's where you're going to go with.
It was not unusual for the United States to see this as a highly destabilizing influence and an extension of Soviet influence.
This is how they're all like this. They're all like destabilizing in what way? Oh, destabilizing your control of the region. I'm sorry, I get really worked up when I hear these architects of Western supremacy. I get really fucking worked up. These are the bad guys. I really encourage you to watch the rest of it. That's just part of it where they interview this one guy. My favorite parts of the documentary where they're interviewing people who are part of the movement, and you could see the revolutionary candle inside them, which has been all but snuffed out, and it just breaks your heart, and it really is a tearjerker in that sense. I'd like to try to provide a little bit more background on Salvador Allende and Chile and the coup that would occur, I believe, I want to say 73, September 11th, 1973. But we're actually going to sort of talk about a tangential story, and this is going to be brought to you by CovertAction magazine. We're going to be reading from Jeremy Kuzmarov's Murder on Embassy Row, 46 Years On, Remembering the Assassination of Orlando Letelier. Is it Letelier? Is it like a French pronunciation? I can't remember. I think it's Letelier. And Ronni Moffitt. This is written in 2022. On the morning of September 21st, 1976, a car bomb took the lives of Orlando Letelier, Minister of Foreign Relations and Ambassador to the U.S. under Chile's socialist president Salvador Allende, and Ronni Carpen Moffitt, a 25-year-old fundraiser for the Institute for Policy Studies, IPS, a left-wing think tank in Washington, D.C. The Chevy Malibu in which they were traveling exploded near Sheridan Circle in Washington, D.C., on Embassy Row. It's chilling. Ronnie's husband, Michael, survived the bombing with minor wounds, cursing the fascists who had killed Letelier and his young wife. 2 years after the bombing, the U.S. Justice Department prosecuted 9 co-conspirators, including 5 Cuban Americans associated with the right-wing anti-Castro movement, along with an American expatriate living in Chile, Michael Vernon Townley, an explosives expert and right-wing terrorist born in 1942 in Waterloo, Iowa, who worked for the Chilean Security Services, or DINA, and CIA. Townley wound up accepting a plea bargain that limited his sentence to 10 years. He only served 5 before being freed in the Witness Protection Program. He saw himself as a soldier in the fight against communism and Letelier as an enemy combatant who'd been carrying on a battle against the Chilean government. Townley claimed that DINA director Manuel Contreras, a CIA asset from 74 to 77, had ordered Letelier's assassination through his chief of operations, Pedro Espinoza, and that DINA operative named Armando Fernandez had helped him surveil Letelier. According to historian Alan McPherson, Contreras, who in 1995 was sentenced to 7 years in prison for his role in the Letelier and Moffitt murders, was an archetypal Cold War psychopath. He, there he is, harbored a murderous paranoia about subversives and was, quote, responsible for the murder or disappearance of about a third or of the roughly 3,000 people killed by Augusto Pinochet's fascist regime. I think 3,000 is one of the lower counts that I've seen. Next, first section here, preventing the threat of a good example. An admirer of Spanish fascist Francisco Franco, Pinochet came to power in a CIA-backed coup in 1973 that ousted Salvador Allende. What a nerd. Allende was a medical doctor who'd helped found Chile's Socialist Party in 1933. He had become the Nixon administration's public enemy number 1 because of what Noam Chomsky once termed the threat of a good example, namely the institution of socialist policies that would inspire other nations to develop their economies independently from Washington. After his election as president, Allende emphasized that Chile was not Cuba in 1959, in that the right has not been crushed here by popular uprising. It has only narrowly been defeated in elections. Its power remains intact. It still has industries, banks, land, and its allies in the army. Allende, as such, outlined a 6-year program of gradual social and economic change to lay the foundations for a legal revolution from capitalism to socialism. And there you are. That's where he differs with Marx and Lenin. Reading on, Kuzmarov says, its aim was to establish public ownership over the country's mines and factories, whose profits would find their way into public investment and social services rather than into the pockets of the wealthy. On December 21st, 1970, a month and a half after his inauguration, President Allende proposed a constitutional amendment to nationalize Chilean copper because, as he explained, quote, the total value of all the capital accumulated in Chile over the last 400 years has left its frontiers. At the time, 2 major U.S. copper corporations, Anaconda and Kennecott, controlled 80% of the Chilean copper industry, which accounted for about 4/5 of Chile's export earnings. Allende was willing to pay compensation, though Anaconda and Kennecott wanted millions more than what the Chilean government felt was just. And you have an image here of, I think this is when he was running, because you have his logo there, that little cross with the A at the bottom. I think this is maybe when he was running. Thanks for the caption, DUS. Anyways, reading on. Even before Allende's inauguration, U.S. President Richard M. Nixon ordered a massive covert intervention in Chile, codenamed Fubelt, whose end goal was regime change. In collaboration with Chile's upper middle and upper classes, the CIA was committed to sabotaging Chile's economy by fomenting strikes and, quote, creating a coup climate by propaganda, disinformation, and terrorist activities to provide a stimulus and pretext for the military to move. Are they going to mention that they literally killed the top commander, the top military guy? So he was elected, and he narrowly won. It wasn't a majority, but there wasn't a runoff at the time. So all he had to do was be ratified by the parliament, the Congress or whatever. And before that even happened, Kissinger and Nixon ordered the assassination of Allende's military, his military guy, his advisor, and who was the top guy in the military at the time. He was a staunch sort of anti-interventionist. They had him killed. I think his name was Schneider. Anyways, there's a whole thing, Schneider. Anyway, so, however, they were hoping that would create a power vacuum and that would help to prevent Allende from being ratified. However, he was ratified, but the movement to get to oust him and the movement for a coup continued. I'm going to read on here. Oh, by the way, this whole thing was supported not just by the U.S., but by sort of fascist forces all over the world. So-called Christian Democrats in Europe, Catholics here in the United States. They all helped to fund, and they sent a ton of money to these anti-Allende forces. Not to mention weapons. The CIA provided weapons. Reading on. Here's Nixon and Kissinger. It's always just two dumb bitches saying, yeah. Reading on. When the coup was carried out on September 11th, 1973, Allende was murdered. The Chilean military subsequently carried out hundreds of executions by firing squad and mass arrests. This is also glossing over the fact and the video of the Chilean armed forces strafing the presidential palace. Imagine U.S. F-16s bombing the White House after the first socialist president, were elected. Imagine that, right? Reading on the Swedish ambassador to Chile at the time, Harold Edelstam, who helped hundreds escape persecution, estimated that 10 to 15,000 people were killed in the first 3 months after the coup, as the Chilean military had orders to kill anyone who resisted. There's Harold. Absolute king. Giant lapels, double-breasted. Love that. Among those who were detained and narrowly escaped death at Dawson Island concentration camp was Letelier, a lawyer and economist who'd first started his career in working in Chile's Department of Copper when he developed his support for Allende's nationalization policy. You can see a drawing here of a Dawson Island prison camp barracks. Next section, one of the many victims of Operation Condor. According to Letelier, the day after the coup, he was taken out of his jail cell, blindfolded before a firing squad. Though one of the sergeants yelled, "Halt!" and his life was spared, temporarily. Jesus Christ. After his release to Venezuela, Letelier moved to Washington, D.C. to work for IPS, where he developed a study of U.S.-Chilean relations during the Allende years and began to plan for a resistance movement to General Pinochet with other exiled Chilean Socialist Party leaders. Dina's assassination campaign, was part of Operation Condor, a CIA-driven effort modeled after the Phoenix program in Vietnam, in which Southern Clone Intelligence Services coordinated their efforts to hunt down left-wing dissidents, including civilian politicians. You see an image here of the victims of Operation Condor. The U.S. government provided crucial support for Operation Condor through police training programs and the establishment of blacklists and a communications infrastructure based in the Panama Canal Zone, as well as the political backing of U.S. officials, chief among them former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who can rest in Pissinger. And I'll skip over this image here of the bloody hand of Operation Condor. You get the gist. In September 1974, in a prelude to the assassination of Letelier, Michael Townley built a car bomb to assassinate General Carlos Prats, Pinochet's predecessor as chief of the Chilean armed forces, and an Allende loyalist who had the potential for leading a progressive military coalition to overthrow Pinochet. And that's just a drawing. That's not a real picture, by the way. A year later, Dina forces tried to assassinate Bernardo Leighton, a former Christian Democrat vice president and founder of Chile's Christian Democratic Party, who promoted the idea of a Christian Democrat Popular Unity or Socialist Party alliance to restore democracy in Chile. Letelier was the next target because he had been A, effective in cultivating alliance with Democratic Party senators and in lobbying for the cutoff of U.S. military aid to Chile. B, had helped initiate a Dutch embargo of Chilean products. C, had denounced Pinochet's atrocities at a large rally in Madison Square Garden. And D, was working to develop plans for a new world economy that would undercut the power of large corporations. Just before his death, Letelier published an article in The Nation magazine arguing that the human rights abuses of the Pinochet regime were inextricably linked to the institution of free market economic reforms promoted by the Chicago Boys, or conservative economists who followed the ideas of Milton Friedman. And I think they call them the Chicago Boys because that's where they taught the economics of neoliberalism at the University of Chicago Economics School. And there's Pinochet there, pictured with the Chicago Boys. Brings us to the next section. Complicity of U.S. government and CIA. And again, it wasn't just the U.S., it was bourgeois interests all over the world. Reading on, the U.S. government was complicit in Letelier's murder because of the Nixon and Ford administration's strong support for General Pinochet's regime and covert support for the deadly Operation Condor, of which Letelier's murder was a part. The same year that Letelier was assassinated, Pinochet personally complained to then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger about Letelier's activities. In a conversation in which Kissinger assured the director that we are sympathetic with what you are trying to do. Jesus. Here's Pinochet there, meeting U.S. Secretary of State in Santiago in 1976, a mere 3 months before Letelier's murder. Michael Townley had learned explosive skills from Frank Sturgis and CIA experts in Miami and worked in Chile under David Atlee Phillips in an effort to block Allende's election in 1970. The CIA not only trained the main culprits, but also aided in the cover-up. During the FBI investigation, it withheld information that Deputy Director Vernon Walters, a few weeks before the assassination, had learned about a covert mission in Washington by two Chilean intelligence officers, Juan Williams and Alejandro Romerala. The CIA, then under the directorship of George H.W. Bush. By the way, you should ask, where was he when JFK was killed? Anyways, the CIA received a phone call in August of 1976 establishing the presence of agents Williams and Romeral in Washington. There's Vernon Walters there, Bush on the right. After the killing, the CIA promoted disinformation that Dina was innocent and that Letelier and Moffitt had been killed by a leftist, so Letelier could be transformed into a martyr. I'm sorry, is there an echo in the room? Reading on. Next section. A death not entirely in vain. Oh, by the way, intrepid viewers will notice that this was recorded the week after Charlie Kirk's timely death. Reading on. A death not entirely in vain. Orlando Letelier and Ronni Moffitt's assassination at the hands of CIA-trained forces provides a chilling reminder of the blowback associated with U.S. foreign policies during the Cold War. The U.S. support for fascist regimes abroad in that period resulted in a huge spike in international terrorism that extended to the U.S. itself. Condor-type operations could easily reemerge today with the advent of a new Cold War, and as part of a backlash against the ascendancy of the political left in South America. Washington's influence, however, and appeal of fascist ideas in Latin America are not as strong as they once were. You have Bolsonaro pictured there saying Pinochet should have killed more people. Which is wild. He was just sentenced to, 46 years or something? You got a picture of Gabriel Boric. Reading on, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who is an heir to the Pinochet tradition, is more and more isolated in the region and poised to lose power in October elections. Oh, this is before he lost. While socialist governments have survived recent CIA-backed coup attempts in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Bolivia, and there was since at least 2 more coup attempts in South America since this was written, 1 more in Venezuela, and a successful one in Peru. Reading on, Kuzmarov says, Chile is currently governed meanwhile by a young left-leaning president, Gabriel Boric, who's repudiated not only Pinochet but also the Chicago Boys, saying that, quote, if Chile was the cradle of neoliberalism, it will also be its grave. I also think that Boric has sort of turned out to be less revolutionary than even Allende was. But reading on here, concluding here, Kuzmarov says, this would have been music to the ears of Orlando Letelier, whose struggle for a more just economic order may yet be fulfilled. Okay, and that brings us to the annotations. Okay. Well, I do hope you enjoyed reading that with me today, talking a little background on Salvador Allende and some of the background surrounding his presidency and the coup in 1973, as well as some other background information. I hope that helps you to understand some of the material conditions facing revolution and revolutionaries and those who are maybe not considered a revolutionary, but yet still are challenging power. They're challenging specifically empire and their power. They're challenging imperialist capital. They're challenging the export of capital. They're challenging the Western notion that they can forever export their capital and that other nations must bend the knee and allow that infiltration of capital, which, as we know, always results in a weakening of that nation's sovereignty. That's how it works. Well, I think we're going to leave it at that today. If you're watching live, stick around. If you're watching the replay, check out the next reading, which I do believe will be on Salvador Allende's victory speech when he first wins his election. Okay. If you do like this reading, I do want to encourage you to support. A couple different ways you can support. One, by supporting the Marxist-Leninist Reading Hub. You can buy books through mlreadinghub.org. You can also support them at patreon.com. You can support me directly as well through Twitch, through Patreon, and with a tip. You got a couple different links there for you to do so. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening with me today. Thank you for doing the work. Love your face. We'll see you next time. Thank you.